Conversation, the Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, the Yvette Cooper Amendment, remember that a couple of nights ago? That was all about getting an extension to Article 50, possibly up until the end of the year, if no deal was agreed by the end of February. And that got defeated. But, folks, if you think the prospect of Article 50 being extended has gone away as a result of that, you would be quite wrong. We had Andrea Leadsom, the Commons leader, just a couple of weeks back saying that maybe we'd need a little bit more time beyond the March the 29th deadline to finalise preparations for Brexit. And this morning, Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, said this.
If we ended up approving a deal in the days before the 29th of March, then we might need some extra time to pass critical legislation. But if we're able to make progress sooner, then that might not be necessary. And we can't know at this stage exactly which of those scenarios would happen.
So if there's a last-minute deal cobbled together, we would need more parliamentary time. In some ways, technically, he's right, because there would be pieces of legislation that would need to go through. And so I suppose if there was a reasonable settlement that was agreed, and we needed another week or 2 weeks, that might sound, on the face of it, perfectly reasonable. But here we've got senior cabinet ministers talking about a potential extension if we agree a deal. What if there's no deal agreed? Well, then I really am beginning to think, that extension almost becomes the favourite. In fact, I've kind of been saying that over the course of the last few months. So I want to ask you, would you accept a small extension to Article 50 if the government promised you it was just to make sure that Brexit happens? Would you, in effect, trust them? That's really, I think, the issue. And if you think, yep, if they promise us it's just for a time-limited period, I would trust them to do this, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, look, this would have to be a very extreme situation because we did actually vote to leave and trigger Article 50, text to 84850. Or maybe like me you think, hang on a second, they've had 2.5 years to sort this out. And surely the most sensible thing, if we can't come to a grown-up agreement, if Mr Juncker and Mr Barnier aren't prepared to stop being rude to our Prime Minister and to come back with some grown-up concessions, then we should just leave on that day, deal or no deal. And I've talked a bit about Article 24 in the last week, and I'll talk some more tonight about that too. If that's how you feel, please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers, you can watch us live and you can comment there too. Sky Data Poll out yesterday within the last 2 days said voters agreed by a margin of almost 3-1. People who say we should delay Brexit by extending Article 50 are trying to stop Brexit entirely. So the Sky Data Poll showed a big public suspicion that any talk, in whatever circumstances, of extending Article 50 was actually a ruse to keep us in the European Union, because, hey, once you've extended it once, well, why not just extend it again? And then why not just keep kicking that can down the road until the next general election? I understand the context in which Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt made those comments this morning, and he may be utterly sincere and genuine in saying it. I'm just not sure the rest of Parliament actually is. Let's ask Rupert, a first-time caller from Marbella in Spain. Good evening, Rupert.
Very good evening to you, Nigel. How are you?
I am fine, actually, considering everything. I am like these people who took part in the Sky Data Poll, Rupert. I am deeply suspicious of anything that hints towards an extension of Article 50.
Yeah. Okay, well, I just wanted to frame myself, just to give you a little bit of background. I was a Remain voter. I live in Spain for several years, and I was a Remain voter. But I did think that we should have had the opportunity to vote. I thought we should have had the referendum. So, fair play to you. I think it was all down to you that we got the vote. So, I've got a lot of respect for you. My whole family are actually Brexiteers. So they flew back They were in South America. They live between South America and UK. They flew back in to vote.
Oh wow! So they were really keen Brexiteers then, Rupert.
I mean, the whole family stayed up, watched the referendum at night, and celebrated,
including you.
No, because I was in Spain.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was in the UK, but I was in another place at that point.
Okay.
But basically, what I want to say is I thought we should have had the referendum. I think, when you look at countries like Switzerland that have regular referendums, I think it's good for democracy.
So do I. So do I.
And also, to be fair, looking back on it now, I have actually changed my mind. If there was another referendum, I would vote to leave. I don't think we should have another referendum. I don't like the way the EU has behaved, and I would vote to leave. But just coming back to your point...
Rupert, can I just ask you?
Yeah.
It really fascinates me, this, when I speak to people like you. What in particular is it about the European Union's behaviour, as you put it, that has changed your mind?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I was quite, I was either way. I'll be honest, I was quite self-serving when I wanted to remain, because I live in the EU. I was worried about how it would affect my business. So I have to be honest, it was quite a self-serving thing. But the more I've studied it and the more I've looked at it, I believe in Brexit now. I've changed over the last year. But I think really, to be honest with you, the fact that they're very arrogant. There's no negotiation going back and forwards. They're not open to anything. And I think, we're Europe's largest trading partner. There's a large trade deficit on the side of the UK.
Massive,
if this was a business deal, if this was a business deal, then you would do it. And I think they've just come across massively arrogant. We have been part of the EU. They want our money. Why don't they come to an amicable agreement or show a little bit of give? I mean, Theresa May is not asking for a lot back at the moment, is she? I mean,
she wants. Rupert, she's asking for a bit of help on this Irish backstop, which she made a huge mistake in signing. And I was there yesterday, but I was sitting, within a couple of feet of Juncker and Barnier, and their response was, we are not prepared to give anything back at all, despite the fact you've made concession after concession to us. No, I get that. So, Rupert, given all of that, and given your change of position, would you trust the British government and Parliament if they said, now we've decided, folks, we're going to extend Article 50 for a few months because we haven't quite finalised the deal? Would you trust them in those circumstances?
Well, this is what I was calling in, because part of it was a question I didn't understand. I mean, I think it's understandable if we needed maybe a couple of extra months to tie up a few loose ends. But I don't trust the political establishment at the moment. I'm actually quite angry about the way things are, being dealt with at the moment, because at the end of the day, it was a democratic referendum. And the politicians seem to be, MPs seem to be trying to frustrate Brexit. Get us to leave in name only, or to stop it altogether. And I don't trust them. I think a lot of people don't trust politicians at the moment. And when you see what's been going on in France and things like that, I'm not saying that's going to happen in the UK, but I'm nearly 40 myself now. I just know there's a lot of people who I know who have voted Brexit, who are extremely unhappy with the way things are going. And what's the point in having democracy if having these votes if they're not going to be executed?
The big mood out there is just get on with it. Rupert, great call. Thank you for your thoughts and your story. Fascinating. I'm down to East Sussex, to Winchelsea Beach, to speak to Paul, a first-time caller. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you. I've been a supporter of yours for many years.
Well, thank you. Now, Paul, very reasonable point being put by Jeremy Hunt today. Just, we may well need a few more weeks or months just to sort of sort this all out. Would you trust them?
No, I wouldn't stand for a day, because they've been heading for this way for a long time. I mean, I think the Prime Minister is exactly where she wants to be. She's looking for a way out for a no deal. And she's got all of her little group around her that are giving her all the excuses to do it. And I think it's the way they're heading. And if they do delay Brexit for whatever reason, and You know, I mean, me and my wife are in our 60s. We're not in the best of health. But if we are betrayed on this, we are going to go up to London and we are going to take to the streets.
You feel that strongly?
Oh, yes, we both do. In fact, she said to me earlier on today, she said, what should we do? And I said, well, we've got to go up to London, love. And I said, but book me a one-way ticket because I might not be coming back for a couple of days.
Oh, Paul, honestly. No, come on. Sure, I mean, look, peaceful protest is fine. I can promise you that if Brexit gets betrayed, there will be democratic vehicles and things you can do to express your view. Paul, maybe there's one circumstance in which extension could be acceptable. If they had agreed, you know, if there was a withdrawal agreement without the backstop and Parliament had, even though I still wouldn't like it, and Parliament had supported it but didn't have the time to get a few pieces of legislation through, maybe in those circumstances it might be acceptable.
I don't believe a word they're saying, Nigel. I don't trust any of them. I think with our Prime Minister, the only time she doesn't lie is when she doesn't speak. I would not trust anything that any of them say.
No. OK, so the date's the date. You better get on with it, chaps, yeah?
And the fact is that, you know, you've been talking about this People's Party that you're hopefully going to get up. Well, we're behind you on that straight away. But do you know what, Nigel? That's going to take time, and we've been waiting for Brexit for so long now that we don't feel that we feel that by going up to London and demonstrating, that's the only way we're going to be heard.
Well, I'm quite sure that if Brexit is betrayed, there will be big demonstrations in London. I just want them, Paul, to be peaceful. That's the important thing, isn't it?
Well, I've never demonstrated for anything in my life, and I want peaceful demonstrations, but. You know, our Prime Minister's got to realise, you know, we're coming for her at the ballot box. Yeah,
I think, do you know what? I think they do realise that. I think they are actually pretty fearful. And maybe that's why the Conservative Party united remarkably on Tuesday behind this bin the backstop idea. Paul, thanks for the call. Thank you for the passion. Anne on Facebook says, no extension. Article 50 states that if no agreement by March 29th, then we leave on no deal. And it does state that, but it also states that an extension is possible. But, of course, it'll need the agreement of 27 other member states. But, you know, Article 50 does say we negotiate a settlement or we just leave on that date 2 years from it being triggered. But it does also, have to be fair here, allow for extension. I don't want any extension at all. If this can gets kicked down the road, folks, they'll do it again and again. They do not, because of their behaviour, in my view, deserve our trust. If you think I'm wrong, 0345 6060973. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:16 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Are you prepared to accept an extension, maybe just a small one, to Article 50? Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, says it might be needed to get legislation through, or is it just a slippery slope? 3 in 1 in a Sky Data poll say those that call for extension want to stop Brexit. And in general, I have to say that is true. Now, I get this about Italy. John in Market Drayton says, with Italy having now gone into recession today, why oh why do you want to stay a member of a European Union? Who's next? And if we stayed, how much money will we have to pay into the EU to bail them out? Well, John, it's funny, isn't it? I raised the 39 billion point in the European Parliament yesterday. I said to Juncker and Barnier, if you're going to be completely unreasonable, then your risk is that we leave and you don't get that 39 billion. And gosh, they didn't look very happy bunnies when I said that, which led Juncker petulantly later to say, oh, well, they'll have to pay us 39 billion even if they leave with no deal, which of course is absolute, total and utter rubbish, but shows me how much they need the money. And you're right, Italy today has slipped into recession. In the last quarter of the year, their economy contracted by 0.2%, and the whole of the Eurozone in that last quarter had growth of 0.2%. Now, I have to say, I'm not pleased with our growth rate. I'm even less pleased with our productivity levels in the United Kingdom, but UK growth is currently running at about double that in the Eurozone, and there are some bigger problems coming down the line. Deutsche Bank, huge German bank, appears to be in some considerable trouble. They themselves today have said that December was a difficult month. Now, when a bank says it's had a difficult month, I think you can say to yourself something very, very serious is perhaps happening, even talk of them having to merge with a state-owned bank. So would we be liable if the whole thing went belly up? Well, arguably, through the European Investment Bank, if a whole series of those investments went wrong, we would be liable for that. Would we be liable directly if the Eurozone goes down? It's arguable. It's arguable. Some will say yes, some will say no. All I can say is I firmly believe that in economic terms, the European Union is like a train hurtling towards the buffers. I don't want to be on the train when it hits them. That's my view. Now, a contrary point of view comes from Jason in Epsom, who says, Nigel, only those with a selfish disregard for others' jobs and livelihoods would leave before a deal is agreed. This let's just get out attitude does hard Brexiteers no credit. Jason, I think really when it comes to hard Brexiteers, what we're saying is we took a democratic decision, we want it honoured, we don't trust our political class, and actually, Jason, very interestingly, we're becoming less and less frightened of a so-called no-deal Brexit with every day that goes by. We've really had enough of big corporations telling us they'll need to mobilise the army, there could be martial law, there'll be no food on the supermarket shelves. We've stopped believing that stuff a long time ago. Nigel, they've had long enough. We need to leave on March 29th. One delay will lead to another, and so on. Barry in Yorkshire, I tend to agree with you. No extensions. The government's had long enough, says Katie. This is really what I think. And countering Jason, Michael says, the least risky option is just leave. It puts us in the strongest bargaining position. No more delays, please. Well, I agree with that too. Joe is a new caller from Clapham. Good evening, Joe.
Hello there, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So, extension of Article 50. We're hearing it from those who would use it as an excuse to try and keep us in, but we're even now hearing it from cabinet ministers. Would it be a good thing or not?
Yes, absolutely. What's wrong with that? I think it's a simple analogy. If a cake wasn't fully baked, you might have heard this before, you wouldn't take it out of the oven and tuck in. You'd wait for it to be finished. All the ingredients are there, it's coming along, but it's just not ready, and I think it needs a bit more time before you take it out.
OK, there are many, Joe, that would say that by the time we get to March the 29th, it'll be getting on for 3 years since we had the vote. Isn't that long enough to for that cake to have risen?
Yeah, you'd sincerely hope so, wouldn't you? But it definitely appears as though that's not the case. And for whatever reason, this government has been able to bake that cake. And, had they have done the job, brilliant. But unfortunately, it's not ready. And I don't think anyone wants raw cake, do they, Nigel?
So, Joe, how long would you extend for? I mean, let's say we haven't reached a deal, that the government is petrified of leaving on WTO terms. How long would you extend for?
It's a good question. I think any more than a year in the public would certainly, become unruly. I think the Brexiteers would be very frustrated by that. I myself voted Remain, but I think if it takes a bit longer to get the deal done, and I accept it's got to be done, then that needs to be the case. I think putting a time limit on it would be very difficult to do.
But because there was some talk of 3 months. If nothing's agreed, we'll need 3 months. 3 months is ludicrous because the European Union won't have time to talk to us because they're going to be fully preoccupied with European elections and, of course, the selection of an entire new European Commission. If you go for a year, Joe, which you think might be a reasonable period, that would mean us fighting the European elections, and wouldn't in a way that in itself be a message to the country that the job simply had not been done properly?
Yes, I suppose it would be in a way. I think it would lead the country into further turmoil, but I just don't see how we can leave without a deal at this point, with nothing on the table. I think it would be absolutely catastrophic. And I think even though we'd be in a bit of a mess because we'd have to renegotiate and we'd be fighting the European elections, as you rightly say, it's worth it as opposed to leaving before this deal is done.
Supposing there is no deal to be done, supposing that Juncker and Barnier, the men that I was with yesterday, let's say they won't budge 1 inch on this Irish backstop, and Joe, my view is, that the Irish backstop is the kind of thing that only a leader whose nation's been defeated in war, frankly, would sign up to. If there is no deal, then surely it has to be no deal.
Well, if that's a possibility, then I think we need to explore all other options before we get there, and I just don't think we've done that yet. I think we need to be with certainty that is the only possible way out of this. And if we do, I think that's a terrible shame for this country. I think that will be the worst possible outcome for all of us.
So you feel?
Do you think it would be quite a good outcome? Are you quite happy with that as an option?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the optimal situation is a grown-up free trade deal. But if we can't do that, partly because we haven't asked for it, but if we can't do that in time, which looks unlikely, you leave on WTO terms. Joe, it would not take very long to come to a grown-up trade deal with the European Union.
But do you not think during that period there would be huge price inflation because we have tariffs put on goods?
No.
But if we're on WTO rules, there would be tariffs applied to imports, wouldn't there?
Joe, we could actually choose to make food prices very much cheaper, because at the minute, as part of the European Union single market, we put tariffs on 12,500 everyday goods and foods. So, Joe, I've seen no worries about food inflation at all.
But if we import goods from the EU, we would need to there'd be tariffs charged on that, right? So we need to get our food from elsewhere.
So European food and wine would become more expensive.
Correct. Yeah.
Unless we chose the option of reducing tariffs on food and wine, and then we'd start drinking lots of Australian wine and finding fruit and vegetables from all sorts of other parts of the world.
But if the EU can produce those things most efficiently,
and maybe, Joe, we'd start buying British a bit.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Britain hasn't been able to supply its own food since the 1950s. We have to import from other countries, and as you say, there are other options, but those can be expensive and those can be less good quality.
Well, if
the EU's on our doorstep, it's a real shame we can't do that. I know you say we want a free trade deal.
I take a different view, Joe. I take a different view. I think we're living in a big, global economy, and I think to sort of inextricably linked ourselves to the European economy, I believe is a mistake. We take a different view on that. Joe, you've put forward a perfectly reasonable case about the cake. Of course, it wouldn't stay in the oven too long, it might get burned. There is a danger of that, but you've put forward a reasonable argument. I just feel, you say more than a year, Brexiteers would get angry. I think at a year they would. Joe, thank you for your call. It's a tough question, Nigel, I get on Twitter. I just want us to get out so we can move on. But if this is the only way, then maybe. David, I understand that in the case of a deal is agreed in the last couple of days, and maybe they do need, a week or whatever it is. But why would we trust them? Unless something had actually been signed in ink and all we had to do, but then you can't sign it in ink, really, until you've got the legislation. I wouldn't trust them. I simply wouldn't trust them. On Twitter, Richard says, the 23rd of June is the maximum. Well, that would have a certain symmetry to it. Not many of you, it seems to me, would trust them to extend Article 50. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Aziz. When Cabinet Ministers hint we may need to extend Article 50 for technical reasons, I do begin to ask myself, why would I believe them? And isn't surely the 2.5 years they've had already long enough to sort this out? And of course, the whole problem is the Irish backstop. She should never have signed up to it. She went over there, left Downing Street at 4:15 in the morning, almost under duress, I think. The unelected bureaucrat Barnier said, sign here. And like the leader of a defeated nation, she did. And now she realises it was a catastrophic error and it's got to be changed. Fascinatingly, Stephen Swinford works for The Telegraph, has put out an exclusive in the last few minutes. Theresa May's chief Brexit negotiator, Ollie Robbins, sent emails advising the government should not back the Brady Amendment, sources tell The Telegraph. He is said to have questioned whether the EU were prepared to make significant legal changes to the backstop, which of course is what the Brady Amendment wanted. Whose side is Ollie Robbins on? Is he on our side? Is he on the government side? Or is he actually on Brussels' side? Well, we know the man's a Euro fanatic, but is this not a case of a civil servant acting way above his station? Appalling. Mrs May, sack him. Get rid of him. Now. Although I did hear this afternoon that David Liddington may now play a more prominent role in the negotiations. I mean, God help us. Can't you find someone who actually voted Brexit? Can't you find someone who actually believes in it? And fascinatingly, Sir Christopher Meyer, former UK ambassador to the USA, who you may remember a few weeks ago was horrifically attacked on Victoria Station. Awful photographs. Well, he's back in action. And everything's working, clearly, because he says, can the alternative arrangements replace a hard border? Yes, says Smart Border 2.0, commissioned by the European Parliament in November 2017. Yes, say other reports endorsed by Lord Trimble. What, in detail, is the objection to these reports? Well done, Christopher Meyer. Well, here it is. Smart Border 2.0, avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland for customs control and the free movement of persons, bearing in mind, of course, that we've had a common travel area with Ireland for many decades. This report was produced by the European Parliament. It was published in November 2017, and it was done to make sure there were technical ways of not having a hard border under any circumstances. It is all a hoax, the whole thing. The British Prime Minister fell for it. Shame. Let's get back to our subject. Bob says, do you think there are MPs afraid they will not get back in at the next election? If they extend Article 50, Bob, my argument would be there'll be a whole lot more of them. And Scarlett feels we need to boost produce more in the UK. Well, you're absolutely right, Scarlett, but have you noticed we are making more cheese? We are making more wine. We are brewing more beer. We are actually beginning in many parts of the country to start to produce more local foodstuffs. And as far as I'm concerned, we can't do enough of it. Kim thinks that jobs will be lost the more we're tied and remain with the EU. Recession causes job losses. Well, the EU is going into recession. Isn't this a big moment to say, hey, this is our opportunity? Robert is a first-time caller from Stanmore. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Nigel. My point is that we signed Article 50 2 years ago, and Article 50 was supposed to give 2 years to do a deal. And the EU said, no, don't want to do a deal until you've agreed how much you're going to pay us. So we've now got to the end of that, and there isn't a deal. I know Mrs May is saying there's a deal, but what we have is no trade deal at all. No. We have an agreement that allows us to pay 39 million, which is the equivalent... Billion. Yeah, I'm sorry for that. Which, when you take into account that our membership fees of the EU are 18 billion, less a bit back, and a little bit of trading, it's 9 billion a year. So what they're doing is they're charging us 4 years membership to give us 2 more years membership of the EU so that we can start talking about a deal. They haven't started yet. There isn't a deal. All we have is that agreement. And I think because of that...
And Robert, if we go through with this agreement, all right, we leave... We hand over the money, and the promise in return is nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing.
There's nothing that says that they're going to actually talk about a free trade deal. I mean, whether they want it or not, I don't know. I suspect they do want a deal because... Well,
Robert, the political declaration does talk about future trade deals, does talk about the desire of the UK to control its borders, and they agree that they will, agree to consider that, but it actually delivers us nothing.
Exactly, and they haven't had the discussion. It was made very clear right at the beginning we'd have to agree an amount, so we might as well keep it. It'll keep us going, and I just really think that we're not talking about whether the deal has to be ratified, whether we should have a few more days or weeks or months. We haven't started. We're just at the position that we booked 2 years ago by signing the deal. And we might as well leave. And we would
be, Robert, at their mercy. Because we'd have to accept all new laws that were made in that period without any say, not we have much anyway, but without any say over how they're made. Even if they adversely affected this country, we'd have to swallow it. The time has come, Robert, to say we just need to leave, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I don't see why we're paying so much money to them just to be able to have another chat, another discussion with nothing coming out.
It's outrageous. Robert, would you call yourself a hard Brexiteer?
Yes, I would like to leave on a WTO deal. I think financially that is going to be so much better for us. My initial thought when we first came up with this, all those years ago, was we buy more than from Europe than we sell. Well, there's no tariffs, so it sounds like a free trade deal, but actually we pay a lot to do this.
It's not a free trade deal. No, it's right. No, it never was. It was a very expensive trade deal. That's what it was. Robert, listen, you made your point very, very powerfully. Irene says, we're not hard Brexiteers, we're just Brexiteers. Well, I'm going to go to another part of the world now, down to Auckland in New Zealand to speak to Graham, a first-time caller. Hi, Graham. Is it? Good morning, Graham.
Good morning, or good evening, Nigel. Look, an extension is Hotel California.
Yes.
They have always wanted to delay this, and that is just another part of the off their tactics. But Nigel, here's a question. Perhaps Theresa May's been playing a deeper game than we thought, and she's run the clock on them. Because, look, I was of the contrary opinion until recently, but now I'm thinking, when I look at what she's doing, is she really actually putting in a situation in which we see their hand, right? So, what was seen as her deal was really their deal. And you see that they don't want to win, they want to humiliate. This is about power.
Well, they've been doing it. I tell you what, Graham, they're really good at it, aren't they?
Oh, they are past masters. But has she outplayed them? You look at it this way. We know that she sidelined Mr. Davis and Mr. Rabe.
Yeah.
And I think they're both honest men who would have tried hard, but they're being continually sniped at from the rear, the fifth columnists, the political class. So would they only have managed to sugarcoat the pill? And perhaps what she's done is she's actually put it there. We can see what they're like. They want to humiliate. I think you can say what you like about Theresa May, but I think she can count. She must have known that
so does there come a
moment?
Does there come a moment, Graham, at some point in the next 57 days, when the Prime Minister stands up and says, I have tried my absolute best, but these are unreasonable people. The time has come for us to walk. Does she do that, in your view?
I think she will. I think she set it up that way.
Well, I tell you what, Graham. I'll fly to Auckland and buy you a drink if she does, because I just don't see that she has it within her. But, anything's possible. And what I do know is there are plenty of people in New Zealand watching the Brexit process very, very carefully, believing it could give them and us too, some trade opportunities for the future.
Oh, and also, yes, that's right. And then I think we played a little part. And here we voted to keep the Union Jack. Now, look, I'm Irish, so I've got a lot against the English, but it was a question. It's a question of globalism.
Not all Irish people. Not all Irish people do, Graham. But no, you're right. Ultimately, yeah. This is the bigger global debate going on, isn't it? The bigger global debate is: do you believe the nation state is the essential building block through which big decisions should get made, or do you take the globalist approach, which says no, these things should be decided at a bigger, higher level? And that is the debate that is running through America, through Europe and much of the world. Graham, I thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Well, the reason we're talking about a possible extension of Article 50 is because it appears the government, despite what they say sometimes in Parliament, given the Spellman Amendment and that vote on Tuesday, everyone's terrified of what's called a no deal. And what has happened over the last week is we've started to have a conversation about that. I get by text, why haven't we heard about Article 24 before yesterday? It sounds like an excellent plan to me. Well, we have been talking about it a bit. Nick Ferrari, over the course of the last week and more, has been talking about it a bit. I've talked about it a bit. I got a Tory MEP in here, David Campbell-Bannerman, to talk about it. And the reason we're talking about it now is because with 57 days to go and no real sensible withdrawal agreement in prospect at the moment, it is a way of explaining to people that no deal is nothing to be terribly fearful of. So I spoke yesterday in the European Parliament for 3 minutes, and I finished up by saying there is a constructive way forward. It matters not just to us, it matters a lot to many people, many farmers, particularly in Ireland. It matters to many jobs and businesses across Europe. Why don't we use Article 24 of the World Trade Organization to buy ourselves at least 2 years of tariff-free trade, and in a rather calm atmosphere, after we've left, sort out a grown-up deal? And I've been amazed by the response. It has been astonishing. The last time I looked, nearly 3 million people have watched that speech on YouTube. And yet, our state public broadcaster, the BBC, haven't chosen at any point to use it. Either they've decided they don't want the Article 24 issue to be debated in our national sphere, or they are completely and hopelessly out of touch. If millions of people voluntarily are watching a speech from somebody in the European Parliament, of all places, surely it says there is an interest in having a proper debate on this subject. I am very disappointed by the BBC, not for the first time. Back to extension. I'm off to Antwerp to speak to Cornelius, a first-time caller. Good evening, Cornelius.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm a massive fan of yours over the years, mate. It's great to have an opportunity to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. Now, Cornelius, there are 57 days to go. Surely isn't it quite simple, this? Don't we, by the end of February, early March, either have an acceptable deal or we give notice we're leaving on WTO terms? Isn't it quite straightforward, really?
Well, to be truthful, I thought we would have gone that route in the first place. At the end of the day, we had an election. The country voted to leave the EU. It triggered Article 50, which means we leave, and on the date that's given, you would think if you had a Prime Minister that believed in Brexit, that's all she had to do was go to the EU and turn around and say that the public have voted. We leave on the 29th of March. We prefer to leave with a deal, but if not, we'd be leaving in WTO, and my front door is open and we can discuss it anytime you like and walk away.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
All this, to be honest, Nigel, right, has become a disgrace. It's become a disgrace on Parliament, on the world stage. It's become a disgrace. The way the BBC have acted on this over the last 2.5 years. I followed Question Time for over 30 years. And the amount of times I've had to turn it off because the panel are all pro-EU.
Well, no.
The way what's happened.
Cornelius, you're being quite unfair to Question Time. Question Time... No, you're being unfair. Question Time is very balanced. Every week, they have 4 Remainers and 1 Leaver.
Exactly. Exactly. But going back to where we are at the moment, right?
Yeah.
I look at Theresa May as a bit of Jekyll and Hyde, to be honest, because the amount of times I watch Parliament Question Time, the only thing that I sort of look up to her to a point is how polite she is during Question Time. She always talks down to all the people that are opposing democracy by asking for a people's vote, another referendum.
She does, Cornelius. And she says, we're going to take back control of our laws, our borders, our money. I think, wow, we've got this amazing leader.
I know.
And then she does the opposite.
Exactly. So I honestly don't know sometimes actually where we are with her. But I just got a gut feeling, and I don't understand why I got it, and I followed this for a long time. We are now in a situation where she have always never put herself in a position to say that we would leave without the deal. She have always said that without the deal is left on the table because we're still in negotiations. And yet we're going down the wire at the moment, and I got a funny feeling she will hold her nerve and get what we want.
All right.
Don't ask me why I think this.
All right, Cornelius.
I got a feeling it's going to happen.
That would mean that Juncker and Barnier would have to backtrack significantly from the attitude yesterday. There may be some shift. Whether it's enough, you may be right. Cornelius, thank you for your call. And some support coming in for Ollie Robbins. Yes, really. Ollie Robbins tried to protect the country from making a fool of itself. Brady has egg on the country's face. Well, Louis, you're entitled to your point of view. And I understand it. I mean, the country. I mean, why on earth would people want to make decisions about their own future? I know what we'll do, Louis. Let's abolish all elections. Let's put people like Ollie Robbins in charge, unelected bureaucrats, and then we can call it the European Union. That is what we're voting to leave. We're voting to leave something where people like Ollie Robbins decide on our future. David is a first-time caller from the Czech Republic. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. I'd like to ask you a question. I'll phrase it as a question. This really to do with the backstop or the alternatives for the backstop.
Yes.
At the moment, you've got a situation where there seems to be no agreement, but the actual report you held up in your hand a few minutes ago, what's stopping Mrs. May going back and presenting their own report to them?
Absolutely.
And saying, we want this with the caveat, but if you don't enforce that now, then we won't consider it after a no-deal Brexit.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, David. And she also ought to quote back to them the words of Michel Barnier last week, where he said in the event of a no-deal Brexit, we'll have to find alternative arrangements, we'll have to do product checks. I mean, not that we need them now at all, but product checks away from the border. So even in the event of a no-deal Brexit, their chief negotiator is saying there would be no hard border. The whole thing has been the most elaborate hoax, David, from day one. I just don't... Maybe the reason she signed it is because Ollie Robbins told her to.
Okay. Well, personally, I replaced Ollie Robbins with Dennis Skinner, but That's another thing.
Well, I mean, Dennis Skinner for 47 years has been a politician who has believed we should run our own affairs. Ollie Robbins seems to think the opposite.
Yes, exactly. I just wonder, though, it seems this problem in life, I've learned you get more with a kind word than a big stick than you do with just a kind word.
Well, very
now,
often.
at the moment, it seems Mrs May is going back empty-handed all the time, with nothing in the club department. The only thing she's got is the 39 billion to say, well, you don't get a penny if you don't agree, or if you're failing that, I think on the backstop issue, if you then reject the EU's proposal for a backstop, come up with a solution, something along the lines of Ireland, although part of the EU, could remain actually within a British customs union, rather than what the EU is suggesting. And that's
the trouble. But the trouble with that, David. The trouble with that, David, is people would say that was us making territorial claims on Ireland, and it wouldn't work. David, I thank you for your call. Thank all of you, actually. But everyone a first-time caller, I have to say. David, very angry. He says, Hunt has thrown Barnier a lifeline by saying we might have to extend Article 50. That gives them no incentive to give us any deal. Crazy. Well, not quite, David. He was saying in technical circumstances. But most of you think no extension of Article 50 is acceptable. So do I. Goodness me. I might have to fight European elections if they do. I'll be back on Sunday morning at 10. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
Can't believe you've been having a go at that nice Ollie Robbins.
Well, I mean, have you seen what he...
I got into trouble today because I accused him of trying to appease the EU.